Good afternoon and welcome to RiskScout's monthly webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. RiskScout is committed to providing insightful, thought-provoking content to bankers interested in starting and growing new business lines at their financial institutions. Together, we provide a mix of personal and professional development to give you the tools you need to be successful. My name is Amanda Sandoval, and I will be serving as your moderator today. And joining me on the webinar is Kristen Parker, Director of Compliance with RiskScout, Ryan McInerney, Principal and Product Strategy with RiskScout, and special guest Stephen Kemmerling, CEO of CRB Monitor. Thank you all for joining us today. This month's webinar is titled The State of Higher Risk Due Diligence, Cannabis Banking, and Beyond. Following the webinar, all registrants will receive a link to the recording via email. Our presenters will leave some time towards the end of the hour for our registrants to pose questions. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please do so by putting it in the chat box in the lower right corner of your screen. Well, I think that takes care of all of our housekeeping items, and Kristen, I will now turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Mana. Appreciate you as always. Thanks for the introduction. I'm excited to be here with Stephen today. We've been trying to get together for a long while now to do a webinar, so why not the perfect week to do it at Thanksgiving? So
glad to be here.
I am excited always to have Ryan, who's our such a critical part of RiskScout. So I thought we'd just start with introductions here. You guys, if you haven't been on webinars or you have, I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of my background here. I'm Kristen Parker. I'm the Director of Compliance here at RiskScout. I have been in banking for over 20 years. I've been frontline staff, and I have spent most of my time over in the BSA AML compliance area with a really high focus on higher risk banking. I really have a passion for the underserved communities that are being underbanked just simply more often because they're misunderstood. And I get to work here at RiskScout every day helping educate others on really practical ways on being able to bank the people in your own communities and to do it efficiently and safely and effectively. So I'm happy to be here with you today, and I'll toss it over to Ryan.
All right, so my name is Ryan McInerney. I was formerly and am reformed as a regulator. So I was working with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and I was in mid-sized community bank supervision to start off and spent some time in large bank supervision, systemic risk and supervision. So was fortunate to get a wide variety of inputs and information from different bankers along the way. And in that, I saw a lot of struggles maybe on the community bank side, even mid-sized side, where people are trying to grow these new portfolios and might not have had the expertise or the solutions to be able to do that. So when I was fortunate enough to meet the team here at RiskScout, and thought it was a great opportunity to come build something that helps a lot of these financial institutions like yours build some of these products. And I'll pass it on to Stephen.
Thank you. I'm a founder and CEO of a company called CRB Monitor. I founded CRB Monitor in 2014 to help financial institutions effectively manage risk and monetize opportunity in the cannabis industry, and doing so through data. We aggregate and maintain what we believe to be the largest corporate intelligence database on marijuana-related businesses, including owners and licenses, negative news, violations history, org charts, etc., which financial institutions can use during their onboarding, enhanced due diligence, and ongoing monitoring processes to ensure that they're working with cannabis-related legitimate businesses, and also being notified if something occurs at a business that their compliance and risk team should know about. And we also should note we are integration partners with RiskScout, and we help one another and our clients manage this risk together.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I thought we'd start with our agenda here today. we've got quite a bit to cover here, and I know we're talking a lot about cannabis here in this space, but you can really take a lot of what we're talking about today and apply it to many other of the higher risk industries that you may be banking. Not just industries as in businesses, but also other markets as in individuals as well. Maybe you're politically exposed people, you're non-resident aliens, foreign nationals, so on and so forth. A lot of the same kind of methodology behind due diligence. While we'll focus a lot on what happened in cannabis, you can really think about other ways to apply this type of due diligence thought processes in other areas that you may be banking. So we're going to we're going to start with the basics, basically, and review the definition of cannabis in popular industry sectors. We're going to discuss the various legal landscapes of cannabis, and we're going to look at the regulatory and FinCEN guidance related to cannabis. We're going to look at what it takes to build a compliant cannabis program and what those EDD requirements should look like, not just when that you're applying for a relationship at your institution, but ongoing afterwards, because we really know that's where a lot of the heavy lifting occurs. And then we're going to explore best practices used when reviewing your cannabis program with your auditor or your regulator. But I also want you to keep in mind this, I was going to include when you do not have a cannabis banking program. If you opt not to, what do you need to talk to your regulators about that process? And we'll dive into a little bit deeper about those comments here shortly. So when we're trying to sit down and think about what cannabis is, we're going to start at the very, very basics here. We need to understand what the difference between hemp, CBD, and marijuana is. Cannabis is the overarching name of this plant. And then at a very, very high level, hemp contains 0.3% THC or less. Marijuana is 0.3 THC or more. And you can have CBD that is derived from either hemp or marijuana. Now, it's important to note that CBD is not just the only thing that can be derived from either one of these plants. We say CBD because it's the most popular cannabinoid that is out there. That is the biggest buzzword, right? But there are over 100 of them in the plant. So you're probably seeing things like CBN, CBG, all these other different elements that can come from and be derived from the cannabis plant together. But this is the basic structure at a really high level of where you need to know the line is drawn in the sand between hemp and cannabis. Anything to add there, guys?
Yeah, I think this is a great summary, and I know we're referencing on CBD and the fact there's 100+ cannabinoids. Tennessee, we see a lot of Delta 8, which is called a synthetic cannabinoid. I think the broader point, and I like to emphasize that on the slide, is that THC is not the same thing as CBD. They're different chemicals. And when you see CBD or other hemp-derived cannabinoids being sold, and wherever they're being sold, they'll often reference this less than 0.3% THC. It's just worth noting that the CBD itself, there might always be a little bit of THC in every product, but the point of those labels is that they're saying that the product itself should have less than 0.3% THC. It's also worth noting that generally we're talking about Delta 9 THC. We don't have, we could do a whole webinar just on this stuff, but Delta 8 THC is technically something different.
Yep. And we're seeing all sorts of other deltas too, right? Pop up 10, 11, you name it, it's coming out and quickly. So it's hard for some of our institutions who are just in one state, but not only the ones that are operating in multiple states, to keep up with the different rules that apply in their state, because we've got states that do allow certain types of derivatives like Delta 8 or Delta 10 or some of these other ones. And then we have some states that don't allow that. We have explicitly outlawed it. So it's important not to overwhelm yourself with all these, acronyms, and just really realize that the line is drawn in the sand with hemp and cannabis. And if you really are in this space, you're going to have to learn how to drill down to what is legal in your state. And usually that comes with having a subject matter expert at your institution, or partnering with a subject matter expert to help you guys better understand what is and isn't allowed in your state. So at a very high level too, these are really the players, how they're broken down. We've got plant touching businesses, direct supporters, and ancillary businesses. Plant touching businesses are the ones that actually have touched the plant during the seed to sale process. Two samples at the top of who are players in the industry: producers and retailers. At some point, they're a producer being a grower, have touched the plant and are part of that process. Those plant touching businesses have different requirements from a regulatory perspective than maybe your direct supporters or your ancillary businesses. The expectations, the licensing, and all that may be different for those that are actually touching the plant. They are different than those who are directly supporting. So a direct supporter is a business that is focused on supporting the cannabis industry. They, a lot of their income is coming in from the cannabis industry. They're getting paid by the growers, they're getting paid by the retailers, but they are not part of that seed to sale process. And some samples of that may be a lighting manufacturer or a farming equipment supplier, maybe even those providing just the fertilizer for them, or other packaging, stuff like that. And then your ancillary businesses are businesses that just incidentally provide services to the cannabis industry. I like to think of it as your local power company. They didn't start their business to go just serve the cannabis industry, but they are serving them because they're in their footprint and they're required to. And then accountants is another good example. Maybe their whole portfolio is not cannabis, cannabis businesses that they're serving as their accountant, but maybe a handful of their clients are cannabis related businesses.
Yeah, for folks who are really interested in digging more, might be familiar with the terminology that that I personally and CRB Monitor created in 2015. That we generally refer to these as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cannabis related businesses. It is a framework that's imperfect and meant to be flexible. But if you Google defining marijuana related businesses or defining cannabis related businesses, I've written a couple of papers that go into a lot more detail about these. Again, I personally use this tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 terminology. Not everyone does, which is totally okay, but it basically aligns with plant touching being tier 1, direct supporters generally being tier 2, and ancillaries generally being tier 3. And I think we'll presumably touch on SARS and that type of filing here. Generally, our clients aren't filing SARS on kind of the third level down generally. So
yeah. And I've even seen a lot of our institutions only filing on tier 1 or plant touching, correct, and then not on their direct supporters or ancillary. I am asked that question a lot, whether they should be filing SARS on all of them or not, and that is a conversation you need to be having with your regulators, because it is, while most of our institutions will only file on tier 1 plant touching, I never like to say a blanket statement that that's acceptable to every regulator, because we don't have it explicitly stated in the only guidance we have on cannabis from FinCEN, which is a 2014 MRB guidance. So we can talk about that again in a little bit, but I think it's important to say that it's important for you to be actively having conversations with your regulator, regardless in this state, if you are banking this industry.
Yeah, and just before we move on, Kristen, one thing I wanted to mention is when we think about these different tiers, when we're looking at any type of, I guess, business line you're going to enter, that stratification and understanding the different risk levels of the business types. So if your institution maybe said, you know, we're comfortable with people that aren't touching plants, that could transfer over to, say, money service businesses, where you're not comfortable with maybe money service businesses that have high volumes international. So understanding the different level of risk that someone in the same industry vertical can pose is really important about determining who you want to support.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point to make, because we've got some institutions who are really risk averse, and understandably so. They don't want to get in this space, but to make a blanket statement saying, I don't want to bank anybody involved in the cannabis industry at all, could really put you at risk from multiple perspectives, in the way that you may pin yourself in a corner, right? Saying, we're not going to do this at all. And you maybe have a client that has been a client of yours for a long time that gets into that industry and wants you to consider banking that industry just so that they don't leave, right? Or you have run the risk of cutting out a potentially really a group of potentially lower risk clients, such as ancillary businesses or direct supporters, that could be really beneficial from income, revenue, deposit opportunities, while not having the same level of risks or potential SAR filing requirements as you do with the plant touching businesses directly. So I like to say that a blanket statement on an entire industry. That's really what came out last year from FinCEN and the FFIEC manual update. There was a blatant statement in there that says blanket stating risk is really not an acceptable practice anymore. So.
Yeah, we had some banks when I was a regulator that would be removing different businesses or different customers from their institution because they were affiliated in one way or another. And some of those was like commercial real estate, and one of the tenants was a retailer or something like that. And it's unfortunate to see that sort of hardship placed on different members of the community when the level of risk they pose really isn't as high as it would be for different members in that industry type.
Right, right. So where is marijuana legal in the United States? Just about everywhere. So we're up to more than half of the United States having some form of legal cannabis in there, whether it be medical or recreational or both. We've got some that are kind of dabbling in it a little bit, like Texas has their own cannabis program, albeit small, but it still counts. So it's important to know, and when you look at the state and really think through it, or this map rather, and you really think through it, every state is surrounded by another state that offers or has some type of cannabis program in place. So the risk to your institution of sometime running into a business that or having funds creep into your institution that are cannabis related are very likely. When you're looking at this map, it's pretty prevalent and easy to understand that it really is in everybody's backyard.
It's worth noting, again, we did definitions at the beginning, but this is truly a map of marijuana states, and not to confuse people between marijuana and hemp. If this were a hemp map, I think it's all 50 states, but this is a marijuana map where marijuana is still federally illegal. I think I'm sure we stated that earlier, but so all of these states are running effectively, use draconian terms, drug trafficking programs that fly in the face of current federal law, even if the law is an unenforced law and has been for the past many years. It's worth noting CRB Monitor tracks, I think we're tracking about 65,000 tier 1 marijuana businesses. So that's just that plant touching marijuana businesses. It's not including hemp or hemp derived products. It's not including the tier 2 or support businesses. And our database also tracks about 125,000 beneficial owners of those 65,000 businesses. So roughly 2 beneficial owners per business. You know, and the reality is most of these businesses have bank accounts. Now, whether the bank knows or not is a different question. You know, whether or not the beneficial owners are using personal accounts or, to quote FinCEN, seemingly unrelated businesses to move money is again, is a risk. And we're going to talk about the opportunity here as well. But it's, you know, it's large, growing risk and opportunity.
Yeah. And with political updates, there is always something happening with cannabis, and there's at least a conversation happening, right? Not any real concrete movement on the Safe Banking Act bill that we all wished would have passed 8 times ago, but has yet to. And there is some movement in that space in regards to getting individuals that were once opposed or wanted different requirements in place for the Safe Banking Act that were really the blockers of it. One of note would be Cory Booker was wanting a lot of reform, and understandably so. And he's right to say that once the Senate touches cannabis once, they probably won't touch it again for a long time. So you better get it right the first time. And so that's been a lot of the grievances, is trying to get the bill to the place where the right big players in there will want to pass it, right? So there was some talk and conversation with Booker over the last couple of weeks that he is indicating that there could be some movement before the end of the year. The end of the year is creeping up, and that's not been a big headline of late, but you never know. From that, regardless of, you know, if the Safe Banking bill passes or not, that doesn't change the legal status of cannabis. And at that point, if the Safe Banking Act were to pass, it gives FinCEN about 18 months to come up with whatever regulations that they want to put into place, which means that's 18 months of still filing SARs, unfortunately, and other requirements. However, regardless of that talk, we did have some movement, at least at the presidential level, of pardoning federal offenses of simple possession, and then Biden encouraging governors to do the same, hoping that momentum takes place. But more importantly, is asking the Secretary of, not more importantly, but important to note, is asking the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Attorney General to really look at how cannabis is scheduled at the federal level. Right now, it's a Schedule 1 drug. We all probably know that, but that is it's at the same level, if not worse, than a lot of what's fueling the opioid addiction problem we have in the United States. And we don't want to get into politicking on this, but it's important to note that you know, that's a big part of Biden's push is, you know, why are we treating this the same as a pill that was manufactured, right, and is causing such a big addiction problem over the United States. And then just recently, and I think it's expected to be signed here in the next 4 or 5 days, is a bipartisan marijuana research bill that should open up the ability for the FDA to get a little bit more involved in this space, albeit probably slowly involved, but involved in the first place, and allowed to do more research in that space.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate a couple things you said, safe banking, it's been passed, I think, 6 or 7 times in the House. The Senate, you know, there's been murmurings that the Senate can get the 60 votes, and that's worth noting that they kind of have to pass on its own. They need to get the 60 votes. unless they're able to tack it on to something like a, this general spending bill or the National Defense Act, which they've tried to do a few times before it's been stripped. And to reiterate what Kristen was saying, that the underlying activity of marijuana actually continues to remain illegal, but the proceeds from cannabis-related legitimate businesses, quote unquote, is magically no longer considered to be drug trafficking. So for a lot of our clients who are looking at this, it removes demonstrably a legal hurdle, but the cost, the literal cost benefit, financial cost benefit analysis of banking in the industry probably doesn't change much. There might be less of an expectation, again, kind of unknown, if SARS will still have to be filed, which is a fair amount of onus on cannabis banking, marijuana banking. But in terms of the enhanced due diligence and onboarding and closer monitoring of the businesses, and when I say monitoring, it's things like license status, negative news, bribery, corruption. A lot of folks think that won't necessarily go away, and even the SARS filing is a little bit unclear. So a lot of our general counsels at banks will say, okay, I think we have the blessing now, but you still have to sit and do the financial analysis to say, does this make sense? And again, Biden passing the marijuana research bill is not really indicative of him trying to push through a broader federal legalization if his administration is working just to pass a research bill. So yeah, I personally expect more of the same for a few years, somewhere between a few years and many years to come. But who knows, because it's politics.
Yeah, I'd echo what Steven's saying. I mean, when you look at historically, when Prohibition ended, I mean, you still had a high level of oversight over the alcohol industry for years to come after the fact, because it's not like things just roll over smoothly. So even if something does change here, I don't know how much of an impact it really makes in the short term.
Yeah, and I always use the example that, money services businesses have been legal for a long time, but it's only gotten harder or more scrutiny to bank them, right? Than it has maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. So it's not to say that banking cannabis will get harder after this. I just don't expect the expectation, even if it's made legal at a federal level, for things to be change much in that space. At best, maybe SAR filings would only be really truly for suspicious activity and not just for checking the box. I think we're still going to be competing with a potentially illicit market, black market that will always exist. So we're going to have to continue to do enhanced due diligence on this space for a long time, regardless of the legal status of it. Speaking of the legal landscape, we've got different players in here that are in charge of different areas of cannabis, hemp, and marijuana included. The USDA is the hemp authority. They took over those states that opted not to run their own state-ran hemp programs. The growers are now licensed by the USDA. And the states that did opt to have their own banking or their hemp program still had to have their programs approved by the USDA and have to adhere to their certain minimum requirements. The states that opted to go under the USDA and not run their own program means that only their growers are the ones that are licensed in their state, most states anyway, and that there are no other authorities looking at the processors or the manufacturers or the retailers within that state. I'm a good state to look at that as an example. I'm in North Carolina. And so right now we only have the growers that are licensed. So that's something to keep in mind in the hemp space, is that there are, when you don't have certain licensing authorities that are overseeing the different parts of the industry sector, it could mean different risks are presented potentially. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're doing your risk evaluation. And then the FDA is really the CBD, and not just CBD. We said CBD is a buzzword, but all the cannabinoids. They have the authority over specifically CBD in the aspect that it was included in a drug for epilepsy. And because it was included in a drug for epilepsy, they now have the authority over that particular cannabinoid. So they also have other rules too. You still have to adhere to dietary supplement rules and labeling and all of that. So there's been several cases where the FDA has gotten involved and sent warning letters to different cannabis-related businesses that are showing claims of efficacy in their advertising or not labeling correctly. It's important to note that the warning letters have gone out, you know, they have a certain amount of time to act on it. None of them have ever, that I'm aware of, have ever been actually closed down by the FDA. They usually clean their stuff up and move on. But the FDA is very slow to move in general, so getting them to put some really rules and guidance over what is allowed to go into a dietary supplement, if anything, or what are we allowed to put this in food? If so, how should it be regulated? Those things are very, very slow to come from the FDA, and it's a big frustration for the industry altogether, especially hemp, obviously, since it's federally legal. We would love to see some forward movement and guidance from the FDA on what's allowed in the consumable space so that businesses can adhere to that more legally. It's already in a whole bunch of food and a whole bunch of drinks, but you know.
Yeah, that's where you hear. Kristen knows I Chuck, I'm a little bit more pessimistic on a few of these things. This is Steve. So one or two notes on this slide, and we are talking about the cannabis legal landscape. Generally, the USDA has oversight of hemp, which, as it's stated here. Now, you have to remember that DEA actually has oversight of marijuana along with the FDA. So again, DEA has oversight of marijuana. So even though it's not on here, it's kind of symptomatic of the broader fact that DEA has been hands off on marijuana, along with the Department of Justice. So they still have, theoretically ultimate say in everything that's being held up is at the congressional level in DEA. So FDA does, by law has overview or purview of hemp and hemp derived products and food, beverage, cosmetics, medicine, including CBD, Delta 8, Delta 10, and they've written a lot about how CBD cannot be put into food or beverages. So in Steve Kemmerling's opinion, and I'm not an attorney, you still see state versus federal discrepancies between states allowing CBD in food and beverages or not enforcing their own rules about CBD in food and beverages or drugs or cosmetics. Because the FDA has been very clear, you cannot put CBD in food and drugs. So in my opinion, again, this is all my opinion, what the industry really wants is for the FDA to change its mind and to change its laws and rules and regulations, not so much updated guidance. But that's for another panel in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's a lot of there's a fair amount of he says, she said, and we could have 50 CBD attorneys on here who would obviously vehemently disagree with me, the non-attorney. But ultimately, if you want, there's FDA has written 10-page FAQs on CBD on their websites that repeatedly say you cannot put CBD into food and beverage legally. So most of us are focused on the marijuana federal versus state legal dichotomies, but I personally think there continues to be federal versus state legal dichotomies at the CBD, hemp derived product level as well. But that doesn't stop people from doing it.
That's the truth. Yeah. And really, we have institutions that bank both sides of the table, right? Hemp and cannabis, marijuana space. And it's really a risk-based decision to that institution is how risky is it for their customer to be selling a gummy that has it in there or a drink that has it in there. And the risks vary, right, based on the products that you're offering and the legal opinions of that institution's council. So I just think it's interesting, the different approaches in different states and all that, and it's going to be like that for a long time.
Right, and that is a good last point that we can move on. Is we even with federal legalization, I think Kristen already said this. You will still have dozens of state laws that don't align, right? So this challenge is going to continue.
And then relevant federal guidance is something that we've gotten one time for marijuana in 2014, about a 2.5-page document, and that's it. That's very kind of broad and tells us basically an institution can do it if it's within their risk appetite and they don't have any regulatory issues pending or under any regulatory scrutiny, right? And then we've got several different ones involving different interagency joint statements in regarding the hemp industry, and then really taking a risk-based focus on banking in general. So basically this sums it up as any institution can do it. Doesn't have to be in a state that is where cannabis is legal, as long as you are serving cannabis-related legal businesses in states where they're operating legally. You can offer cannabis banking. And we hear a lot from institutions that don't think that they can because, for example, I'm in North Carolina, marijuana is not legal in North Carolina, but we have institutions here that serve the cannabis industry in states that are legal. It is still outside of their footprint, but they've gone through the whole risk assessment, board approval, regulatory buy-in process and feel comfortable with offering the services and have no issue in doing so.
Yeah, I'd say from a regulatory perspective, when you look at any of this stuff and you try and get a straight answer out of your regulator, sometimes it's just not going to happen. I mean, I remember when I was with the OCC, the rhetoric that we had was essentially, if we were asked, just say marijuana is federally illegal, which isn't yes, it isn't no. We're very good at giving very vague answers. So if you do decide this is in my risk appetite and it makes sense according to what we want and the types of things we're looking to achieve at our financial institution, you present it after the fact and then you see where things go from there. That's when you get the real feedback.
And Ryan, isn't it like a rule of thumb? We don't really want to ask our regulators for permission necessarily. We want to let them know we're doing something and then let them give us feedback on whether or not they think it's a good idea.
That's typically how you'll get better feedback, I'd say. Because if someone asks me a direct question, just ask for my opinion, I can only say so much. But if they show me kind of their plan and what their intentions are, I can then say, this might be safe, this might be unsafe. Here would be our recommendations based on your stated activity or plan for activity. So you'll definitely get better feedback that way.
Good to know. So steps to building a compliant cannabis program. This is kind of an A to Z type of process. Some of these don't necessarily go in this exact order, but these are things that should be checked off a list for a successful cannabis program. So a risk assessment, which we'll dive into each of these pieces a little bit further, but a risk assessment is necessary. Board approval should really be done after the risk assessment, so you know that before you go out and build a program that you really have their buy-in. You really need the board approval after the program is built for their final sign-off, since they really truly are the ones that are responsible for that program, at the core of it anyway. And then regulator buy-in. You want to, again, like Ryan said, you want to kind of have your business case built out to discuss with them what your approach is going to be. You want to do it really after your risk assessment so you can express what you know and identify hazardous risks, and maybe they can share best practices with you. Design your customer onboarding procedures, design ongoing enhanced due diligence procedures, and Then you want to make sure your policies and procedures are lined up, and that the fact that you have policies and procedures that are dialed in to every line of business at the institution, not just the ones that are going to be handling it every day heavily. You want every line of business to have your policies and your procedures and cannabis addressed in each of those, so that they know how to detect and redirect those clients or those prospects for vetting prior to onboarding. And then you training, bank-wide training is critical. Board training is also critical, but each bank-wide training needs to be line of business specific. And then committing to continuous training for key personnel, including those that will have the heavy hand in the program, is critical. Partnering, having your own SME or partnering with an SME to help you stay abreast of the changing legal landscapes and requirements for banking this industry, best practices is critical. Then you want to have ongoing testing of your controls and how you were assessing your program as it grows and scales. And then you want to have proper monitoring in place and a reporting program. When you have a risk assessment, you really want it to be specific to the cannabis industry. You really need to have one that is designed to help you understand the legal status of MRBs legally at the state level and the federal level. We want to understand the opportunities, including what the competition is in your area, the revenue potential, ROI, risks associated with each industry sector. There's different risks that cannabis, we talked about at the very beginning. There's, not every cannabis business or sector of an industry, the risks presented are not equal. So really diving in and understanding the risks that each of these industry sectors can pose, so you can understand if you have the right tools or if you need to invest in the right tools to help you mitigate those risks. You need to understand how your staffing is. Do you have the right people in place? Do you have the right technology in place? Training is also, do you have the right way of communicating effective training? Does your board of directors really understand what you're getting into, or do they think it's just a really cool thing, or is it something that they're morally opposed to, right? You got to find the right type of communication with the board in order to effectively help them understand what your mission is here and how you're going to protect the institution. And then you really want to take into account your latest audit and exam results. If you're having issues inside of your institution that are needing to be addressed, maybe it's not the right time for you to get into a program like this. You have other things you should be addressing first. And then board of directors approval, best practices, those include, we really suggest after you do your risk assessment, you go to the board of directors, and that's why they have a full scope and understanding of all the considerations you're bringing up. That helps them make a better, more educated decision to deny or approve a full program build. And it's best to have your board of directors from your key leaders on the same page. I know firsthand, I have been at an institution before where you had your key leaders on one page and your board of directors on another, and then it just became really skewed on, are we doing this or are we not doing this, guys? And do we want to put the effort into building this? And then it just, somebody get cold feet and pull out of it after we've spent all this time and money and resources trying to understand the industry and build it out. It's not a good feeling, I don't suggest that for anybody. And then you never want to begin a program build without your board of director blessing, at least, because you don't want it to be a possible waste of time, because it may have the whole time never been in your risk appetite at all. And then they've got to approve the entire program that you built out prior to program launch. And this will help them better understand how you've designed your risk mitigation efforts, you will better have communications with them long term about this is what it's going to take to staff this. This is our capacity. These are how many people we or businesses that we wish to bank now and have the capacity to do so now. When we reach this level or are approaching the capacity level, these are the communications we'll have with you in regards to, do we want to continue to onboard? If so, we're going to have to hire more staffing. All that transparency in the very beginning will help for better conversations long term in the growth of it, because what you don't want to do is think that you can do this with a scaled up program with the same little staffing you have now, because it will, while technology is going to help really gain some efficiencies for you and help you be able to, the right technology will help you be able to gain a significant amount of efficiency, but you're still going to need a subject matter expert. And as you add 100, 200, 300 clients, you may have to add additional staffing to, assist with all of the regulatory requirements that are required for banking this industry. And your regulator will expect board of director approval before your program launches.
That is a fact. Another piece that's really important to have at this point when you're getting through the board approval, identifying different metrics and things that you're going to report on a recurring basis that give the board enough information to make decisions, understand the level of risk in the program. What's really important about that recurring reporting, that recurring information sharing, is really the ability to know, this is what is happening in my program, this is how it affects maybe our liquidity, it affects our capital, it affects maybe regulatory risks, and then making sure that there's an avenue for the board to make decisions where things change if they actually ask for it to change. These are levers that can be moved, pulleys that can be pulled, actions that can be taken that have a meaningful impact to address and adjust how your program is functioning. I guess I should probably take this one.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah.
I'm letting you guys roll with these. So, not even letting this is your forte.
So on the regulatory side, typically you do want to present to regulators after you've performed your risk assessment. First off, it just gives you a little bit more to talk about with your regulator. I mean, to an extent, they might know what's happening at your institution, but you really are the subject matter expert there. And so when you can provide that information, these are our mitigating controls, this is what we've planned, and this is the level of risk we're willing to take on. When you bring all that information forward and get that conversation going, it's going to be more fruitful than just, hey, we're thinking about this area. You have any ideas? And you really want to do that, so that conversation you're having after the risk assessment, but definitely before the program launches. Because if there was some area that you could have gotten feedback or they would have wanted something to change, then that's something that should have happened ahead of time. They don't want to be left in the dark and then come into the next exam and be like, oh, you have 40 cannabis customers now, or you've started an entire yacht portfolio or something like that. So really getting your regulator involved after you've done some planning, but prior to rolling out the program.
Yeah, we've had an institution before that told their regulator they got the buy-in and everything looked great, and the regulator thought they only had 10 clients and they came in and they had 300, and they didn't bother to update the regulator of how much growth they've had in the last year, which set the tone to be pretty negative during that review, because the regulator automatically felt uninformed and kind of misled in a way that caused the whole exam to have just a different tone than it should have had, right? They had desired that they had told them how much it had grown so they could bring additional staff in to help, review the institution. But you just want to also get their buy-in, but you want to keep them abreast on some type of reoccurring update of the health of the program and the size. And now to the really juicy stuff here about Designing a cannabis customer onboarding system. So this is where we really touch on EDD. The information that you collect needs to be centralized and through a robust account opening process, or vetting process rather. You really need to be able to have all of your staff trained to direct these potential cannabis related businesses to the right staffing so that they can be vetted prior to onboarding. A best practice is also to determine when site visits will be required by your financial institution. Some of them do it before they want to go see the business prior to approving their relationship, and then others will do it within about 60 days of the approval of the relationship. And vetting must include a full scope EDD review of the business by the responsible line of business, meaning that it cannot be your business development officer that is conducting all of the due diligence on these businesses prior to onboarding. There needs to be a party that is not got skin in the game, I guess is the, for lack of a better term, goals, business account opening goals, that is approving these relationships. Not to say that they wouldn't try to do the right thing, but they also aren't trained to look for the things that we are in the BSA AML compliance space. So the EDD review completed by the appropriate line of business, which is usually BSA AML compliance world, should include the business completing a specific account application designed for cannabis. This will help drill down into understanding what type of business operations are occurring, what states they're operating in. It will help them understand what licenses they have to operate, and that will help in the validation process of those licenses. There should be adverse media screening of the business and the UBOs. All your beneficial owners should be reviewed for that potential watch list information too. Website marketing reviews are encouraged. This will help you understand if they are potentially violating any FDA rules. Could be important to your institution based on the type of products and services that you're offering. An FDA violation for a deposit account may not be as relevant to some institutions as an FDA violation to somebody who's lending to a business based in their assets or their collateral is on their products themselves, right? Those are two different risks that are brought there, but it's encouraged that you at least through the website marketing review are also validating that the business is truly doing what they say they are doing, at least on the surface level. And then again, you want to scan the key parties against any risk list, watch list, politically exposed lists, so on and so forth.
Yeah, just to layer on here, again, this is specifically onboarding, but a lot of the ongoing monitoring reflects this as well. But things that we commonly is a strong word, that we often see, I guess the same thing as commonly, the things that we see at onboarding, MRBs. So let's see, I'm going to go to the bottom one. Again, keep in mind that when maybe you're talking with Kristen or me or Ryan, I do think marijuana versus hemp. So if you're banking hemp, we have a number of hemp only clients who do run the hemp businesses and beneficial owners against our marijuana database to see if the hemp business has exposure to the marijuana industry, and maybe the hemp business might be running marijuana proceeds through their account, or B, if the hemp company is really just a marijuana business, which we've seen both of those occur. Businesses not reporting all licenses, there's a few reasons why for that, but let's just say that it happens, which it does. They'll open an account with you, and maybe for some reason they only want you to know about their retail licenses, and maybe they want to keep their cultivation licenses separate, or wholesale or something like that. So having a unified database of all licenses linked to an entity is important. UBOs, again, similar. They don't always, you're relying on self-reported data, but are they really telling you about all their UBOs? We see MRBs that quote unquote forget to mention certain UBOs. when they're onboarding. Not always because of negative reasons. Maybe they just forget, or sometimes those UBOs might have a history with them that they don't want you to know about. And adverse media. There's this concept of adverse media or negative news, which is kind of broad, media search, headline, kind of grabbing type news, versus violations data. And this is something that we're working on specifically with RiskScout to refine violations data, meaning marijuana licensing agency specific violations, which generally don't rise to the level of adverse media, right? But that you would want to know about when you're onboarding a new marijuana business. So I might ask Kristen to expand for future use on this adverse media and violations data on these companies, because it really is two different kind of sources. And then lastly, most of these companies do not have websites, frankly. We're tracking 65,000 marijuana businesses, maybe 5,000 have websites, because most of them are cultivators or wholesalers or processors, right? Not really that retail facing website-ish type of company. So a lot of times there is no website or marketing materials to review, in my opinion.
Yeah. And then ongoing EDD requirements are somewhat repetitive from what you're looking at when you are onboarding them, but you should be reviewing at least on a recurring basis that we usually see every 6 months to annually occur. But we're reviewing and doing a check-in with the client to say, has any of this information changed? Collecting that information, if updates have been made, or if updates haven't been occurred on the business or any of the beneficial owners, so on and so forth, you're going to go do a full scope review that includes reviewing the beneficial owners, CIP information, any of the key parties, any type of licensing events. You're going to want to utilize what Stephen was saying, where you still want to run those licenses and you want to understand who is really involved with those licenses. So in case they did either wittingly or unwittingly leave a UBO off of the update to your institution, you have that ability to know who really is involved with that, so you can determine the level of risk involved with continuing to bank that business. You're gonna want to obviously check back on your transaction activity. You want to look at any type of variance. We call it variance tracking at RiskScout, where we're comparing the data from the core transaction activity versus the revenue activity of that business, and ensuring that if there is a variance where there is more inflows into the institution account than there are revenue, that we flag that so the institution knows that there's more inflows than there is revenue, and that should be something they should probably dig into and look at further. You want to have a consistent formal review documented of your due diligence efforts. And you want to have a methodology where all of your analysts are looking at the same methodology of reviewing a business, so that not one business is treated and looked at from a risk perspective in one way, while another analyst is using their own review form to look at it in a different way. Regulators prefer consistency in that perspective. You also want to consider if you have the ability, you have more than one or two analysts, that you don't have the same analyst who's doing these due diligence reviews, reviewing the same business over and over and over again and risking complacency in what they're looking at. Have your reviewers swap off so that it's a fresh set of eyes looking at these businesses from that risk perspective. And then from there, at least on the marijuana side, you're going to have to do SAR. You're going to have to make a SAR type determination. Again, you're going to want to speak to your regulators on whether or not you need to be filing beyond the tier 1 or plant touching businesses. If you haven't had that conversation, I encourage it, because if you are filing on all of them, they may only want you to file on the plant touching, and you may find some relief from that perspective. And you want to thoroughly document, obviously, any risk profile changes and escalate those accordingly. And I know we're right at time here, so the last couple slides talk about policies and procedures and really ensuring about it that you have those dialed in and that you regardless of whether or not you're banking cannabis or not, it needs to be addressed in your policies and procedures. If you are banking them, you need to have that whole procedural process and policies approved, laid out. If you're not banking them, you need to prove to your regulators how in your processes you are choosing not to bank them. How are you vetting them out to ensure you're not banking them? And we always encourage you not to say, I will never bank these guys in a policy. You never want to pin yourself in a corner. You say, we do our best to not bank these. If we were to come across one, we would do X, Y, and Z. And anything to add there, guys?
But of course, I'm going to say if for all of you who have, well, whether or not you have a policy to not knowingly bank them, or you are currently banking them, all of CRB Monitor's clients, cannabis friendly as well as those that aren't, proactively screen their accounts and payments and UBOs for marijuana touch points, because as we've already kind of pounded on a few times, you very likely, depending on what your footprint, you very likely have exposure to these direct tier 1 marijuana businesses, whether or not you know it. Often it is the direct MRB. Sometimes it's seemingly unrelated business. Sometimes it's a high net worth account that's investing in directly into MRBs. We haven't even talked about publicly traded MRBs and getting profits or proceeds back from the marijuana businesses, or just using personal accounts. So if your statement is you do not bank them or don't knowingly bank them, but you don't have a procedure to effectuate that policy, you basically don't have a policy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think the two of you nailed that. So.
And then again, go ahead, Brian.
Nope. I got nothing.
And then again, training, we touched on this earlier. Training really needs to be line of business specific, and you need to make sure it occurs on a recurring basis, and you better have somebody sign off that they received that training as well. Account opening staff should not be allowed to open any accounts until they go through this training. And then ongoing testing of controls is important. So you want to make sure that you have operational limits, know what your staffing is capable of, what your technology is capable of onboarding. You want to have metrics designed, like Ryan was speaking to earlier. You want to make sure your operational limits are adhered to, and they're socialized and they're well understood by everyone. And then you really, from a risk threshold, should consider what your appetite is, capacity, how fast do you want to grow your program, what kind of employee experience you have, and then any type of growth projections.
Which can be very tricky in this industry, given the fluctuations in cannabis prices and the growth projections of the underlying industry.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother webinar in itself, right?
It really is. Yeah.
And one quick thing I just want to add on the limits and the controls and all of that fun stuff is just make sure you're prepared for the question of what do I do if these get breached, rather than a check the box exercise. Make sure it's something actionable and then you're actually using for risk management and operational considerations.
Absolutely. Amanda?
All righty. Well, thank you, Kristen, Ryan, and Stephen, for sharing your insights and expertise today. And it looks like we are now out of time. But as a reminder to all our registrants, you will receive a link to the recording via email. And also you can find the webinar as well as past webinars on the RiskScout YouTube channel. We invite you to like and subscribe. We also want to thank you for joining us today. And on behalf of everyone at RiskScout, we hope you have a great day. We wish you a happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays.